Most people, when they encounter the Bible, tend to skip right over Matthew, chapter 1. To many, it feels like nothing more than a long, irrelevant list of ancient names from a distant past. Yet, hidden deep inside, this seemingly dry genealogy is one of the most shocking and incredibly hopeful revelations in the entire Bible. Matthew isn't simply listing ancestors. He is strategically making a bold, world-changing theological statement. He boldly declares that Jesus Christ did not emerge from some perfectly curated, pristine line. Instead, the Messiah entered human history through a lineage riddled with sinners, documented scandals, and outright outsiders. This scandalous inclusion is necessary because Jesus came specifically to save sinners, to redeem those scandals, and to welcome every last outsider. Today, we are going to explore the scandalous grace of God revealed in Matthew 1, a grace that embraces the broken and the fallen. Matthew wrote primarily for a Jewish audience, where genealogies served as sacred proof of legitimacy, inheritance, and core identity. If Matthew's goal was purely to convince the Jewish people that Jesus was the promised Messiah, you would naturally expect him to highlight only the most righteous ancestors. However, Matthew deliberately chooses to do the absolute opposite of what logic would suggest. Instead of polishing the family tree until it shines, Matthew intentionally exposes its darkest and most compromising branches. He intentionally includes women with highly questionable pasts and reputations in the community. He features foreigners, known sinners, and documented historical scandals right in the direct line. He doesn't shy away from mentioning specific acts of immorality, long-held betrayals, and moments of public shame. The profound reason for this is to powerfully demonstrate that God's overarching plan has always run directly through imperfect, flawed people. First, we see Tamar, the courageous woman who was profoundly wronged by her father-in-law, Judah. Tamar had to disguise herself as a prostitute to confront Judah's blatant injustice against her. Her story is undoubtedly messy, deeply painful, and incredibly uncomfortable for many readers even today. Yet, Matthew insists on including her specific, difficult narrative within the lineage of the Savior. This inclusion declares that God sees the unseen suffering, defends the deeply wronged, and redeems what was intended only for shame. Next, we encounter Rahab, who was not only a woman but also a Gentile and openly known as a prostitute. By every single cultural standard of that ancient world, she should have been entirely excluded from any honorable mention. But God purposefully writes her name into the official line, leading directly to the Messiah. Her terrible past did not disqualify her, because the power of God's grace completely rewrote her entire identity. Then there is Ruth, the Moabite outsider whose entire people group originated from an act of incest. The established religious law itself explicitly stated that Moabites were to be excluded from the community for 10 generations. Yet, in a stunning twist of providence, Ruth becomes the great-grandmother of the mighty King David. This happens because God's incomprehensible grace actively breaks down all human barriers, cultural walls, and religious exclusions. Matthew then pointedly refuses to call her Bathsheba, instead referring to her as the wife of Uriah. This choice intentionally reminds every reader of King David's terrible sin of adultery and his subsequent murder. God includes in Jesus' genealogy the direct results of adultery, betrayal, the abuse of power, and a man's death. This lineage is not sanitized for comfort. It is presented as raw, deeply human, and completely real. God includes all of this because he wants you to know that no amount of sin can stop his redemptive plan. Finally, the list contains King Manasseh, arguably the absolute worst and most wicked King Judah ever produced. Manasseh actively practiced witchcraft, monstrous idolatry, and even horrific child sacrifice throughout Jerusalem. In spite of this overwhelming evil, he is still found recorded in the line of the Messiah. The reason is that God's incredible grace always reaches far lower than any depth of human sin can possibly fall. Matthew is essentially shouting this message to everyone reading his gospel. God's grace is simply bigger than human sin. Your past history, no matter how dark, does not intimidate the creator of everything we see. Furthermore, God's divine purpose is not fragile and cannot be accidentally broken by our inevitable human failures. The fundamental truth is that Jesus didn't arrive on the scene for people who had their lives perfectly figured out. He came precisely for the wounded, the ashamed, the rejected, and those who feel completely like outsiders. God deliberately chooses to work his miracles and plans through the most imperfect and complicated stories imaginable. The very parts of your life you try hardest to hide might become the greatest testimonies to his mercy. Crucially, Jesus deeply identifies with all of humanity's pain because he didn't arrive above our fallen state. He chose to come directly, flawed through our fallen humanity, experiencing it with us every step of the way. Because Jesus came from this broken lineage, it fundamentally changes what that means for every single one of us today. You do not need to come from a perfect family background or a perfect past for God to start something entirely new with you. Your biggest, most damaging mistakes and failures do not get to write the final chapter of your personal story. The unending grace of God is always the force that gets the very last defining word on your life. Remember that God consistently chooses to include those who feel the most marginalized, forgotten, and utterly unworthy. If you feel left out or passed over, Matthew 1 is loudly proclaiming that God chooses you right now. The Messiah is absolutely not ashamed of the messy, complicated, and painful history you carry around with you. Instead, he steps into your current mess with profound compassion, not with judgment or condemnation. This theological truth means that deep, life-altering redemption is a very real possibility for absolutely anyone. If God found a way to redeem Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and even Manasseh, he can powerfully redeem you as well. In closing, Matthew chapter 1 is not a boring historical list. It is a radical declaration of scandalous grace. It is a grace powerful enough to actively include every single broken person it encounters on its path. It is a grace that actively transforms the most rejected people into honored parts of the story. It is a life-altering grace powerful enough to completely rewrite the most painful and shameful stories we carry. This redeeming grace is the very same force that has run through all of human history, generation after generation. And standing at the absolute center of this entire sweeping narrative is the person of Jesus Christ himself. He didn't come from a perfect, unattainable family tree. He came directly from ours, full of all our imperfections. He came through our humanity, steeped in sin, shame, and constant, beautiful failure. The ultimate reason is that he came for the express purpose of saving us, redeeming us, and fully restoring us. Matthew chapter 1 tells every single person watching this one undeniable truth. If God could bring the Messiah out of filthy mess, he can bring incredible, lasting beauty out of your